Domestic news, let's get into it. Host of Overnights on Radio 2GB, Luke Grant, and our Brisbane chief, Sky News, Adam Walters. Gents, thank you for your time. Great to have you wrap up the week with me here on Friday. This likely pay rise, millions of workers, Luke, could, I think it's 2.5 million, could end up with more money in their pocket. The Albanese government is going to back a pay increase, but they're not talking about how much. The ACTU, as Trudy just said, wants 7%, so to match inflation. The Chamber of Commerce, representing particularly small business, they say, look, it's got to be no more than 5.5%, but 3.5%. And they say we can't afford it, and it'll risk plunging the economy into recession. Long way apart, 7%, 3.5%. Can small business afford it? Where do you think it'll land?
You know, it's funny, isn't it, the government saying, oh, we don't want to say how much, but they made the clear statement, or Tony Burke did, they don't want people to go backwards. So if you don't want to go backwards, you pay inflation, which this week came out at 6.8%. That's near enough to 7%. That's going to cost $12.5 billion, Peter, for small businesses already doing it tough. You know, it's almost like they imagine that CPI only affects the worker, but not the employer. I think they land somewhere in the middle, most likely. But for the government to say they're not exactly backing the union in, I think is a bit disingenuous, quite frankly.
That's a really good point, because inflation hits the small business operator, and many of them, as we know, Adam, don't take a wage. CEDA, Committee for Economic Development Australia, they've got a report out to say that there's 2 million people low income, so it's about the same as might get this Fair Work Australia pay increase. About half of their wages are going now on energy and housing. Now, if you've got half going on energy and housing, what's left has got to cover everything else. So all the other bills, food, running a car, educating the kids. I mean, we're in a diabolical situation because we're being squeezed at every corner, and the government promised a lot before the election, Adam, but there's not a lot to be delivered, or the budget coming up, but it looks like it's more pain.
And just a little over 24 months before the next election, this is going to be electoral poison for the Albanese government, Peter. There can be no doubt cost of living pressures will supersede the importance of meeting a 43% emissions reduction target in the next 84 months. It's a nightmare awaiting those very same low-income earners who've been credited with giving the Greens a powerful youth vote and such a strong showing in Brisbane, for example, with 3 inner city seats won at the last election. But those same voters are now faced with having housing and energy costs swallow almost half their disposable income. It's reality biting hard, and a very clear case of careful what you wish for, I'd say.
I very much agree with that, because I've always said the pace of the transition change will claw back some of that, you know, positive climate vote. When you're not hit by the decisions you make at the ballot box, you can have all the sort of sunlit uplands you like, but when it has a ramification in your hip pocket, I think that moderates views on things like climate change. Let's pick up this issue late this afternoon. Porter Davis, it's one of Australia's largest home builders. No more today, Luke. 1,700 projects in limbo. It's not just that this company's gone under. We've had a whole lot, though, of building industry players go under. We've got record demand for properties that people can't rent, can't buy, and we've got all these new migrants coming. This is a real concern.
Yep. It's a massive concern, Peter, and it'll be immediately evident with rent. We're seeing it now. We've got something like a 50,000, I think I heard the master builder say the other day, shortfall in tradies and carpenters to work in these places. So we've got businesses collapsing, a lot of them in Queensland. We've got a shortage of workers, and we've got more people coming who require housing, some of which will be filling the need of those workers. This, goodness me, this could go so pear-shaped so quickly. Governments really, one thing they can do is get the hell out of the way. Do what they can with red tape, get rid of it. Let people with a quid get out there and build properties and just get out of the way. This is not a time where governments can be too precious around development, environmental needs and the like. We've got to get buildings and homes built. It's a really, gosh, we're right on the edge.
But we've got the same problem on the Greens front, though, Adam. You mentioned a little bit there about the Greens pushing and shoving and certainly dictating to Labor. We hear reports today the Greens want to return to Bill Shorten's 2019 policies that voters rejected. That they want the tax breaks for landlords to go. They want negative gearing to go. They want to abolish the capital gains tax discount. You know, the government needs the Greens, particularly in the Senate, to get legislation through. This looks like it's a blood price, particularly on housing legislation. Now, if that all collides at the same time as businesses are going under, we've got more migrants coming and landlords, let's say, leave the market, we're going to be in all sorts of strife.
Well, absolutely, especially, Peter, when the government is just depending on the revival of the building industry post-COVID to create jobs, to solve the accommodation crisis facing so many people in Australia. In Brisbane, for example, homelessness is at 22%, 3 times the national average, and yet we have the Greens basically putting a gun to the government's head to remove the incentive for investors to create desperately needed housing. None of this makes any sense.